Hi, good afternoon, everybody. This week we've been talking about Thomas Jefferson and his legacy. Jefferson was very concerned about his legacy at the end of his life. There is a wonderful presentation available at the Library of Congress, both online and if you have the ability to go to the Library of Congress and see the Jefferson exhibits, you will see a series of correspondence and letters where he is concerned with his friends and extended colleagues, their perception of him and what his legacy really would be. He also had fallen on hard times, and so much of his library collection and other belongings had to be sold to settle his debts. Fortunately, the Library of Congress has a fairly substantial collection of the remaining works from Jefferson's library and gives the visitor a good idea of what that library looked like. The reason I started by talking about his library as part of his legacy is Jefferson's thoughts on the role of education were one of his greatest legacies. The University of Virginia, which he founded, was at its inception to be a place of learning and the free exchange of ideas. Interestingly, it did not initially include a seminary, which Yale, Harvard, Princeton, and other colleges in the founding period began with a major component being teaching preachers. So Jefferson carried out his thoughts from the Virginia Statute and from the Declaration of Independence about the separation of church from state. Notice I think one of Jefferson's legacies is not the separation of church and state, but church from state. It is important to remember that Jefferson, in his formative years and throughout the Revolutionary period, opposed the idea of the head of the government, in this case the King of England, being the head of the church because it politicized the church. Church membership then became required, for example, to advance socially or politically. And so we have the separation of church from state, not church and state, because I think that Jefferson would agree more than many of the founders that it was imperative to have a moral and right thinking government and those participating in the government without having the government dictate the rights and the religiosity of the population. Jefferson's legacy continues with a strong voice against a powerful central executive, whether it is his confrontations with Hamilton over the central bank, which George Washington was a fan of, advocated strongly for, but Jefferson opposed. We look at the notion of Jeffersonian democracy, which is that it's the role of the individual. It is the education of the individual, the famously apocryphal quote, an educated citizenry is a vital requisite for our survival as a free people. Goes to the heart of the issue that for the citizens to participate, they must be educated and aware of the issues and of the critical thinking that goes into making these decisions for those who are going to represent us. But it is not the role of the government to be all-powerful and all-seeing. Jefferson came back in many of his correspondence and in the Declaration of Independence to this notion that religion is a very individual experience and liberty is a very individual experience. And those parallels carried over, interestingly, even to later in life, his commentary on slavery, because slavery changed for him. He did believe that those inalienable rights would eventually be extended to those in bondage. And at the end of his life, of course, he did free Sally Hemings and at least 4 of the children that he may or may not have fathered. So there's going to be continued debate about that. But I think that his greatest legacy really comes to be limited government, where we see even organizations such as the 10th Amendment Center and others constantly refer back to his discourses discussing the fact that the role of the state is not to govern everything about the man, but that the role of the government is to take those things which have been granted from the people and use them responsibly and wisely. So I hope you found this informative, and I look forward to hearing some of the comments and discussing this with the class going forward. Thank you.